It's my song! Let's sing it! It's gonna be freaking awesome! Come on! It's gonna be freaking awesome! You know the words! It's gonna be freaking awesome! That's it! Sing! It's gonna be freaking awesome! Yeah!
Hello everybody and welcome to another fabulous episode of the Coolest Geek Alive. I'm your host, Jesse Blaze Snider, comic book writer extraordinaire, musician, voiceover guy, host, whatever, father of four. I do things. I make babies. I make comics. I make tunes. That's pretty much sums it up. I made that theme song with my buddies in Dilf USA. If you haven't had a chance to go and download some of the music by Dilf USA, pretty soon our theme song will be available online to download wherever music is sold or streamed or whatever it might be. Anyway, I'm super excited because today we're going to continue the tale of my career as a writer, working on adapting these wonderful geek culture, classic mythologies from Marvel and DC and Disney Pixar and the Muppets. I have been in the industry working for 25 years now, something like that. And oh man, everything that can happen to a writer in comic books and other media has happened to me. And I've been slowly talking about my experience working at Marvel, where I wrote a Hulk story and a Deadpool story, at DC, where I created Dead Romeo for them. And I have been pitching endless good ideas to them for ages now, and seeing that basically the way this system is set up, Marvel and DC and these big companies, they are not built to receive good ideas. Generally, they're built for their editors and their producers who are in charge, who aren't writers, who generally aren't really great creative people, but sometimes are. They hand down mediocre ideas to people like me who dedicate their lives to becoming great writers to execute things like this to the best of their ability. Because, when you're given a crappy idea, the fundamentals are crappy, all you can do is your best. And that's what most of the writers in the industry are doing now. They are writing the best version of some crappy idea that was handed to them. Generally speaking, you have to really become a big name in the industry before they let you begin to creatively dictate how the storylines are going to unfold in the comics, especially when it comes to larger storylines that cross over with other books or storylines that cross over the entire universe. You want to do that? Your name better be Mark Millar or Brian Michael Bendis or something really big, somebody who's got some power over there, or you better be a writer/editor like, say, Denny O'Neil or Dan Jurgens or somebody like that, who's been involved at the company for so long that they've been given the keys to the kingdom to some degree. If you're a guy like me who's got a lot of ideas and a lot of passion and interest, it might be a while before your great ideas will actually get published by any of the major companies, which is unfortunate. Today, in particular, I wanted to talk about my experience working for Boom Studios' Boom Kids line when they owned the license for Disney and Pixar, and very specifically, the Muppets. They owned the rights to the Muppets, and that's why I was there. I was the writer of the ongoing Toy Story comic book, but that only came about because I approached Boom Kids about writing the Muppets, and it took a couple years, I think, before I was given the opportunity to write the Muppets. But, oh man, that moment when I was called and offered what would be dubbed Muppet Snow White was one of the greatest moments of my life as a writer. I got into writing comic books so that I could be a part of the wonderful and enduring history of characters like Batman or the X-Men. I didn't actually think at the time that I would have the chance to write the Muppets in comic book form, but I will say, being given that opportunity, seemingly out of the blue, was the greatest opportunity I've ever been given. And I'm still so proud to this day to have worked on the Muppets, to be able to say that I worked on Jim Henson's creations just a little bit. I'm so disappointed in how my book actually came out, because when you work on licensed material, often you have to deal with middlemen who represent the company that you've licensed the characters from, who more often than not are not lovers of the source material the way you are. They've taken the job for monetary reasons. They've taken the job because simply it was offered to them. But now they are between you and telling a good story. Sometimes also you just have problems with lawyers and copyright and whatever legality might be getting in the way. A good friend of mine, artist Jill Thompson, had once told me an amazing story. I mean, this is a upsetting story, really, but it's a funny story about working on the licensed X-File comic books. She had drawn the book and she got a note back from them immediately upon seeing her work. And the note was, could you make Mulder look a little bit more like Mulder and a little bit less like David Duchovny? Now, for those of you who didn't watch the X-Files, Dave Duchovny is the actor who plays the character of Mulder. So Jill Thompson was asked to make the character who, before the comic book, had only ever been portrayed by David Duchovny. So a character known for looking like the actor who plays him is drawn looking like the actor who plays him in the comic book, and Jill was asked to make him look less like the way he is known to look, simply for legal purposes, because they don't want to pay for the likeness rights to David Duchovny. So now we have to make a character who's only ever looked like David Duchovny look unique to himself, so we don't have to pay David Duchovny for his likeness. These are the types of notes that you get when you work on licensed material. Last week, or actually 2 weeks ago now, we talked about my experience working on Toy Story. We talked about how when I depicted Mr. Potato Head in a Buzz Lightyear costume as Spud Lightyear, all of a sudden everything came to a halt on our book. We had to rewrite issue number 4 and retroactively change the story in the middle of the storyline to make it like that had never happened, and rewrite the graphic novel so Spud Lightyear never appeared, because the legal department said that any depiction of Mr. Potato Head in the pages of Toy Story could be made into a toy by the company, I think it was Hasbro, that owned the license to Mr. Potato Head. So by making a Spud Lightyear in the comic, that made it so that Hasbro Toys could make a Mr. Potato Head that looked like Buzz Lightyear, and they didn't have to pay for a license. As it turned out, anyway, there was already a Spud Lightyear coming down the pike from the toys. Like literally 3 months later, me and my editor, Aaron Sparrow, were looking through our toy catalogs and we see Spud Lightyear. There it is. The legal department for the Pixar licensing thing, all they had to do was go up the chain and see if that was in the works, find out if we could do it. But often these licensors, they're not willing to ask questions. They don't want to ruffle any feathers or give people extra work to do when they can just say, no, just don't do it like that. And then we don't have to worry about it. So writing licensed comic books can be a lot of trouble. And the trouble that I had on Toy Story pales in comparison to the trouble I had on Muppet Snow White. Now, first of all, Muppet Snow White as a title, it was supposed to be called Snow White and the Electric Mayhem, which I think would have sold much better in the first place, but they wanted all the titles of these fairy tale books that they did at the time to be uniform. So the title was changed to Muppet Snow White. That's one of my first gripes with how this all shook out. And that gripe is actually with the publisher, Boom Kids. But my main gripe is this. I love the Muppets. I feel as though they have been mishandled by Disney over and over again. I really believe that I have locked in on what makes the Muppets tick, what makes the Muppets so great. Specifically, they make us feel better about being ourselves. The Muppets all have a unique passion that they are pursuing with great vigor, and they are all failing miserably at their chosen pursuit. Fozzie can't tell a joke. The Electric Mayhem can't finish a set without Animal destroying the place. Same thing with Gonzo. He can't put on his performance art without destroying the set. The Swedish Chef can't cook anything. Kermit is a frog running a variety show. Miss Piggy is a pig. She's a pig person. She's pig-headed. She's egotistical. She's rude. She's not somebody who deserves to be rewarded with success like she was rewarded on the recent The Muppets show, which is why that show fundamentally did not work, because the Muppets did not do what they do best. They fail, and they make us feel like less of failures. Look at them trying their best and not getting what they want perpetually. It's funny, it's fun, and it makes us have less anxiety about the fact that things aren't exactly working out for us in our own individual pursuits. The Muppets, especially for creative people, is just like a warm blanket, a warm cup of milk, something that makes us feel better about our own inadequacies, because thankfully we will never be as bad as the Muppets. Literally, the saying from Britain when you say, "Oh, you Muppet," you're calling somebody a Muppet. What are you saying about them when you call them a Muppet? You're saying, "You can't get it right. Why can't you get it right, you Muppet?" Because the Muppets, they can't get it right. That's what the Muppets are about. Whatever they do, they can't quite get it right. So when I was tasked with giving a Muppet version of the Snow White tale, I decided to go back to the Brothers Grimm version of the story, because there's this wonderful, you can only get it on VHS, and I don't know if to call it a movie or a special. It was called Muppet Fairy Tale Theater, and it starred Rizzo and Gonzo. It was the very first time those two characters were put together, Steve Whitmire and David Golis. They were wonderful. They had some magic between the two Muppet performers. They really captured some lightning in a bottle, and later you see them as the Charles Dickenses in the Muppet Christmas Carol. And this was because they saw how effective that duo was, Gonzo and Rizzo. Seeing that in the Muppet Fairy Tale Theater special, I thought, I'm going to cast these two characters as the Brothers Grimm. And I'm going to have them try to retell the original version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, basically bending over backwards, trying to cover up the things that aren't for kids. Because if you've read any of the original Brothers Grimm fairy tales, they are very, very dark. Snow White in particular has a lot of really dark moments. There is a heart that's brought back to the queen, that it's from an animal to prove that the huntsman had killed Snow White when he really didn't. Things like that. We switch the heart into a tomato, and other little adjustments are made throughout the story. Like, the prince doesn't show up until the very end of the fairy tale. So Rizzo's like, man, you got to establish the prince earlier in the story. So, of course, we have to establish our prince earlier in the story. There's lots of changes and commentary that we make on the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, on the Disney version of the fairy tale, and it's all a lot of fun. The main point of the whole thing for me, too, was that I wanted it to end in the classic way that the Muppet writers used to always say about how they would end a sketch on the Muppet Show if they were out of ideas. Namely, by blowing up the set, eating the main characters, or throwing penguins in the air. And by the end of our miniseries, we do all those things in spectacular fashion. I actually am still very proud of the book, everything considered, but the process of working with my licensors to get this book where they wanted it to be was harrowing, to say the least. I was so excited to do this. I was so excited to write it. I started on a Monday. I finished it midday Tuesday, and I immediately sent it off to my editor. I, again, was so elated. I started work on issue 2 almost immediately that Tuesday and had finished the next issue by the end of the next day. And I was on to issue 3 the day after that and had finished that the morning of that week's Friday when I was about to start working on issue 4. But then I got my notes on issue 1. Now, I really went out of my way to try and make this series both funny and heartfelt, because that's always the way the Muppets have been portrayed. They are coming from their hearts. Sometimes it's funny, but sometimes it's just meaningful and sweet. So there were moments in my book that were really meaningful and sweet. Like the very first page was just a big splash page. It was a stained glass window with a Muppet pig in the queen's crown sitting there, and it was basically telling the whole tale of Brothers Grimm's Snow White, the way it opens. I did a version of the original opening, which is just this beautiful thing about there was a queen once, and she pricked her finger while she was sewing at her windowsill, and a drop of blood hit the windowsill, and there was this red blood on this white snow on this black ebony wood. And she thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if I should have a daughter whose hair was black as ebony, whose skin was white as snow, and whose lips were red as blood. And then shortly after that, the queen died. And it was so beautiful. When I read it to adapt it, I was like, that is so beautiful. Can I just have that in the book just like that? Well, no. I was so devastated by the notes that I received that I did not write issue number 4, which I was about to write, for months after I got my notes for issue number 1. Right off the bat, she didn't like this sweet introduction that I had. This lady, the main licensor person who was looking at my book, she wanted rubber chickens and whoopee cushions in the background. She wanted my one single panel broken into many panels. She didn't want it to be pretty. She wanted the jokes to start immediately. In fact, very quickly she said, I want a joke in every single panel. And she wanted bad puns. She thought that the Muppets were all bad puns. For those of you who aren't big Muppet fans, the Muppets are not all bad puns. There are a few sketches on The Muppet Show and a few sketches and scenes or whatever that have featured bad puns over the years, but that is not what makes people love the Muppets. Bad jokes can sometimes be fun and funny, and I do like the occasional bad joke here or there, but that is not what the Muppets are all about, and that was certainly not what my book was all about. But she wanted a joke in every panel, and this was a big, big problem, because one of my other major concerns with the book was it was a Muppet fairy tale book. Now, the Muppets have always been made for adults and kids. It's always been something that everybody could enjoy, that there was something for everybody there. And I wanted to keep that going. But a Muppet fairy tale book in particular was probably going to skew a little younger. It was most likely that this was going to be a book that was going to be read to children. A parent having to read a comic book to a child. I don't know if you've ever tried to read anything to a child, but if the book drags too much, the children will literally reach across and grab pages and start turning the pages themselves, because there's something really satisfying about turning the page. We're continuing forward. We're moving forward. We're almost done. I can go to sleep in a little bit, depending on how antsy and excited and engaged they are. And it usually takes a few pages to get people engaged. So what do you do as a writer to mitigate the fact that your child who's going to be being read this book might be antsy and impatient? You don't put a joke in every panel. You spread the jokes out. You try to make the dialogue and the narration brisk and easy to get through so that it's not a slog for your reader, which is probably going to be a parent reading to a kid. But now they wanted me to add a joke into every panel. I didn't have a good joke for every panel. I immediately rejected that notion that I was going to write a joke in every panel, and I basically sweetly told my editor, I can't do it. Can you get somebody else to do it? And a man named Patrick Stork was brought in, who's a buddy of mine. He's a great writer himself, and he felt bad. Notes from him, Jesse, I'm so sorry. I had to screw up the pacing of your book by adding these jokes in. Of course, this was the assignment he was given, not his fault. Kudos to him. He did actually add a joke or two into the book that's pretty good, but it was a really tall order. I was already making all the jokes that were obvious and that were there, so he's just like adding all these jokes that aren't really necessary or completely out of left field because there was nothing really to say. We needed a joke in every panel. This is a crazy note you're getting from a licensor who doesn't know how to write, who's not a creative person, who's just an idiot who thinks we need more jokes in this book. That was one of the single worst notes of my entire life. When people bring me this comic book at conventions, I ask for a black marker and I start crossing things out from the book. I'm like, this book is going to be so much better once I'm done crossing out all of these unnecessary jokes. And it's not even about the fact that some of the jokes don't land, and aren't necessary. It's just what it does to the pacing. my book was such a brisk and wonderful read. You would get through that first issue and you'd be like, oh man, this is great. I want some more. But now it's a slog. It's okay, we're almost there. Don't worry, honey. And your kid's falling asleep before you get through the story because they're bored, because they've been on the page looking at the same pictures for too long. These are things that I knew as a writer were a mistake, but I couldn't even argue on my behalf because I would be arguing with a licensor who's not a writer, not exactly an editor. They're just the person who was put in charge of making sure that this license that they have with Boom Studios isn't a problem, that there's no legal ramifications from it, and that generally speaking, the book's quality is there at a glance, which tends not to be about the story or about the fundamentals. It's about how it looks. Are these characters on model? On model. That's what they would say. On model. Can you make Mulder look a little bit more like Mulder and a little bit less like Dave Duchovny? And you make Kermit the Frog look a little bit more on model for Jim Henson's hand. Different sorts of problems that you're dealing with between X-Files and the Muppets, but it is all similar in where it's coming from, where the motivation for your notes are coming from. Now, the worst thing about these notes that I got was it wasn't just one person. I got sent one of those Microsoft documents where you can see different colored notations from different people. There was about 5 different people reading my script, and each one of them was offering different colored notes. My editor, God bless him, Aaron, he barely had any notes in there. He was adjusting some spelling errors and some grammar things, maybe a note or two. I don't remember what they were. But that main person who wanted a joke in every panel, she was all over my book. And a person who I'm not going to name because I don't want to insult the person. This person has done good work in other areas, but they are not a very good writer, especially not a very good writer for the Muppets. Because when they write the Muppets, they make the Muppets like Sesame Street and not like the Muppets as they were depicted on The Muppet Show, which again is not a show like Sesame Street, which is made to teach young children. It's a program designed to entertain the masses, both the young and old alike. This person, who was credited with writing the single worst Muppet film I had ever seen. It's not a film that's called The Muppets anything. I'm not going to name it again. I don't want to try to crush this guy in any way, shape, or form because he's clearly a very kind of sweet-natured dude, but he is not the right person to be handling the Muppets. Their notes were so inane. They didn't get any of the humor because they have a very juvenile sense of humor. Anything that they perceived as kind of mean-spirited, they pushed back against because they didn't want anything that was mean-spirited. Well, sometimes the Muppets can be mean under the right circumstances. Or if it's warranted, like in my book, where they throw Scooter out and they kick him. He's no longer the manager of the Electric Mayhem because he hasn't been booking them good gigs. He's not doing a good job, and he gets booted from the squad. Well, when he gets booted, there was some joke that was being made about him stinking at his job, and instead, they made it into this super hopeful moment where he's like, oh, well, now I've got the time to go off and pursue my culinary dreams or something. I don't remember what the hell it was. It was just some sort of Magoo joke, like were all of the jokes that this guy was suggesting or all of the jokes that this guy was trying to edit. He was just trying to take all of the edge and all of the bite out of the book and turn it into a children's story. It wasn't meant to be a children's story. We were doing the Brothers Grimm version. We were doing something that the adults could appreciate, that we were playing with in smart ways. This was a book designed to be loved by all, but it was being pulled into children's territory by one of the editors, the Muppet-specific editor, and the other editor for me, that was the licensing person at Disney proper. They were making it completely unreadable for a kid by adding a joke in every panel and making the whole thing too heavy-handed. Well, the book still ended up coming out and being one of the more loved stories during this period of Boom Studios publishing The Muppets. Roger Langridge had done the Muppet Show book at the time, and people really enjoyed that. I largely enjoyed his Muppet Show. It was not exactly what I wanted as a fan, but it was certainly fun and lovingly executed, pretty to look at, and lots of good jokes scattered throughout. The fairy tale books were a bit scattershot because of these crazy notes we were getting from editorial. Roger Langridge was a cartoonist, so they were kind of letting him do what he wanted to a certain degree. But the Muppet fairy tale books, you know, everybody knew the fairy tale stories, so all the people working on the book had things to say about every Muppet fairy tale book that they put out. But ours came out pretty good, especially when I realized around the third issue that those higher-up licensing executives weren't looking so hard at the book anymore, and I started deleting some of these extra crappy jokes that were being added to my book and some of these changes that had been made that I completely disagreed with, and I managed to change them right before it went to print, and nobody noticed. Thank you again to Aaron Sparrow, my editor, for not changing them back and letting me get away with this. The final issue is my favorite of Muppet Snow White. Famously, I forgot one of the main characters of the book, Bobo the Dancing Bear, who I love that character. He's originated by Bill Beretta. Bill's depiction of Bobo, he's just this bumbling, lovable guy, and I really wanted him in the book. But I completely forgot that he was in the book because it took me months before I wrote the fourth issue because I was depressed. I was depressed over my notes on the first issue and the second issue and the third issue. I didn't write the fourth issue until my editor said he needed it. And I quickly wrote the issue, and Patrick Stork, who had to go in and add jokes to every panel, he literally went, oh crap, we forgot Bobo, only right before we were going to go to print. And he added Bobo to the very last panel of the book. So if you read the miniseries, you'll get to the last page and you'll see Bobo shows up with a little flag in his hand. And he's like, hey, what'd I miss? Which is really, this is like, for me, is like my favorite part of the book. So thanks, Pat. Thanks for saving me, man. I almost really screwed the pooch boat with that one. But, I mean, seriously, the fundamental problems with this book were there from the start. And one day, I will have the ability to clone myself and send myself out into the world with black magic Sharpie markers to erase every extra joke and everything that shouldn't have been in this book. But that is the life of a comic book writer working on licensed material. Sometimes it can be a very disappointing, disheartening proposition. And it really was for me when I worked on the Muppets, which just, you know, my favorite property. I wanted to do Muppets books so badly, and to be able to do it and then just have it be so close to perfection. I mean, if you are a Muppet fan, you know what? If you are a Muppet fan, your homework assignment is email me at jessiblaze@jessisnider.com, and I will send you the original scripts of Muppet Snow White. And your homework assignment is to read them and get back to me and let me know how damn awesome they really were. I know, because I'm a big Muppet fan. They were great. And they screwed up my darn scripts. Continuing in my career, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my time working at Boom Kids on the Disney and Pixar properties. None of these things that I'm about to talk about ever came out. The only other thing that I did for Boom at the time was a one-page story. It was a CBGB's story for a CBGB's anthology that they did. I wrote the one-page story that was handed out at North by Northwest, and there's like some festival that they used to do, and this was given out as a one-pager to promote the anthology. And I just wrote one-page comedic story about people trying to figure out while waiting online to get into CBGB's what CBGB stood for, because it's country bluegrass and blues, I think is what it stands for, and everybody has all these weird things that they thought it stood for. I know because I played at CBGB's before they tore the place down, essentially, or tore the place apart in New York, in Manhattan. I played there maybe 2 or 3 times with my old band Baptized by Fire, which if you ever want to check out my band Baptized by Fire, pretty cool band. We were known for a song called Juggernaut. You can find it reissued under my name, Jesse Blaze, and it's the Baptized by Fire, the Phoenix, I think is what it's called. The band was great, the music was great, and I knew a little something about CBGB's because I had played there. So I wrote this really funny one-pager. The fun story there, and by fun I mean completely heartbreaking, is that I wrote a one-page thing. I really loved it. I was very happy with it. My editor reaches out to me and they say, hey, we need to get rid of one panel. Which one do you want to lose? Like, which one of the punchlines? Because there was like kind of multiple punchlines in the story. It was building all these different ideas about what CBGB stood for were coming. And the last one was the payoff, was the funniest one. And I don't remember what it was, but I told the editor, just pull out whichever one you think is less funny. And he removed the punchline. He pulled out the last joke, the one that I was ending on, because it was the best one. Never in a million years did I think he would pull out the best one, but that's what this editor did. It was not Aaron Sparrow. It was a different editor who I won't name. Oh my goodness. I literally was like, hey, my first perfect comic book creation. It's a one-page story. Awesome. Well, at least something's going to come out perfect. Granted, it's only one page. And my editor screwed it up by pulling out my freaking punchline. I guess because it was the easiest panel to remove. The last one. The punchline. Just pull that one. Fucking idiot. All right. There's just so many ways that these things can go wrong, and I feel like I've had projects go wrong in every conceivable way until I started making them myself. So, what did I pitch when I was working for Boom Kids? I pitched Monsters, Inc., I pitched Cars. I pitched an amazing Pixar crossover. I pitched a Darkwing Duck and Gizmo Duck team up, and more. A lot of these things might have happened under different circumstances. My Monsters, Inc. was really great. It was a legit sequel to the original Monsters, Inc., and I think they should do it today. It was basically about civil unrest in Monstropolis, because most of these monsters who were working the scare floor, they were scary monsters. They were out of a job the moment Monsters, Inc. switched to laughter. How are these scary monsters supposed to work in the industry anymore? Basically, a lot of monsters lost their job at the end of Monsters, Inc. So I said, ramifications of that, that's great. That's such a Pixar story. And the story was really about James P. Sullivan being right in the middle of everything. He'd been basically promoted to a position of prominence within the government of Monstropolis, and he really felt like in the middle of it. He was the one who discovered laughter, but he himself was a scarer, and there was this scary monster who he was super into, who was fighting on behalf of the scarers, and he was in love with this scary monster lady. Being a scary monster was always a good thing. Now all of a sudden it was like these goofy monsters were put into power, and it was causing a lot of trouble. I think the story was actually approved by Disney, but at the time, Boom Kids wasn't ready to do another Monsters, Inc. miniseries because the first one hadn't exactly set the sales charts on fire. But of course, I didn't write the first one that they had put out, but they weren't ready to do another one until they gave it a little bit of space to breathe. I still want to tell that story one day. I would love to tell that story properly through Pixar. It was one of the best pitches I ever wrote. I was very proud of it. Also wrote a pitch about Cars where they go on a road trip. It was designed to bring out John Lasseter's real meaning behind Cars, which was that it is the journey, not the destination. And I wanted to do a Cars miniseries where it really bang that nail home. It's all about the journey, not the destination. And I was going to have Lightning and Mater traveling around the country, hitting all of the most major American landmarks that we have, and seeing what those landmarks were like in the Cars world. My favorite one was Yellow Cab National Park, which basically was facetiously setting up the idea that the Cars were living in a post-apocalyptic Earth where all of the humans had died off, and an idea of a cab, a yellow cab, a vehicle designed to transport people from place to place, was literally just like an alien concept to them that they didn't even understand. These were prehistoric cars. So I really like that. We also, the main part of it was them traveling to the Sturgis motorcycle rally for them to deal with a bunch of motorcycle gangs in the Cars world, which I thought was going to be really fun. The Pixar crossover that we did, I won't get into it, but basically the toys follow the monsters into Andy's closet, and they end up going all around the Pixar universe, essentially seeing everybody by the time the story ended. I wanted to do that one so badly as well. I'm sure you've heard me say before, I'm a huge fan of the Pixar films, especially the first 15 years of Pixar's output. I mean, most of those movies are generally perfect. What film studio can say that about their output of films or TV shows for any significant period of time? Pixar could for a while. Me and Aaron, my best buddy and my editor at the time, we really wanted to work on the Darkwing Duck and Gizmo Duck miniseries. We've been talking about that forever. I love Darkwing Duck. It was his idea to have Darkwing Duck get licensed by Boom Studios in the first place. It was a huge success for them, and I was just waiting for the right time to do this miniseries with Aaron, and it was going to be the first thing that we wrote together. We were really excited to do that. But somewhere along the way, a bit of a pissing contest developed between the Boom Studio heads and the head of the Boom Kids division, my buddy Aaron. And basically, Boom started to do things that Disney was not happy about. And when Disney said, hey, you screwed up on this level, you screwed up on that level, you screwed up on that level, they blamed it on Aaron. This was very foolish of Boom because Aaron, as he has with everyone, had great relationships with Disney. He had great relationships with all of his creative people, and he had great relationships with the Disney liaisons. They knew that Aaron was a fan. They knew that Aaron was doing their best to work with them and give Disney what they wanted. Aaron's first priority was to keep Disney happy so that they could keep the license for as long as possible, and people like Aaron and I, who loved these properties that Disney owned so much, could continue to work on them for forever. We honestly would have been really happy to be still working on Darkwing Duck and Toy Story and Muppets today. I honestly, we would be the serfs working at Boom. We would have been there for forever as long as they had those characters, and be very happy to be lovingly adding to the mythology of all of those properties. But it was not meant to be. At a certain point during my time at Boom, my page rate was cut significantly. And Aaron was very cool to me when he went about breaking the news to me that my page rate was being cut down. He was very apologetic. He really cared that he had to say that to me. He was upset that he had to because he felt like I was doing a very good job. He was very happy working with me, and he thought I deserved what I was getting. That meant a lot to me, that he cared so much and he put it to me so thoughtfully. So when they fired Aaron, I had a lot of loyalty to Aaron. To this day, Aaron's one of my best friends. I basically went, well, screw them. And if Aaron's not going to be here, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here. And they better be really nice to me because they're not being nice to my friend. And I think all of the creative people at Boom Kids who had been working with Aaron felt very similarly. We had been treated very well by our editor. And when they got rid of him, we were ready to revolt. We were ready to leave. But it didn't matter because within about 6 months, Boom had lost the license because, like I said, they could blame Aaron for the problems that Disney had with Boom Studios' publishing of their material all they wanted. They were working with Aaron, and they could see that it wasn't Aaron who was the problem. It was the executives at Boom who kind of just did whatever the hell they wanted to do. They didn't care if they rushed out a book that wasn't exactly on model. Later, when Aaron and I were working for Disney again at Joe Books, granted, none of the things that I was developing at Joe Books had ever actually come to fruition because a lot of things that were going on in my life at the time. But me and Aaron, we had originally been trying to get the license. Eventually, another friend of ours who started Joe Books, they got the license, and we said, okay, great. As long as all of our friends are going to be working on all of these books again, we're really happy. So Aaron actually had to go and redraw lots of material that was published by Boom Studios because the problem that Disney had was the quality of the material was not on model with what they wanted. Again, the stories tend to matter a lot less than how it looks at a glance. Is this reflective of the films and TV shows that Disney is putting out? No. Therefore, books like Rescue Rangers and things like that came out with art that was rushed and not exactly up to Disney standards had to go back to the drawing board if they were going to be published again. And some of these things did get collected into graphic novel collections by Joe Books at the time, and Aaron had to go and redo those things, in some cases rewrite these things. And I was just kind of helping out a little here or there, uncredited. There were some books that I was primed to do, like I really wanted to try to do a zombie Mickey ongoing from the Runaway Brain. I'm not sure, I don't remember what it was called. It's the animated short where Mickey becomes a zombie version of himself. I wanted to turn that into the beginnings of an ongoing series a little bit, or at least launch an ongoing series starring zombie Mickey. But we didn't get that far in our plans. But that was basically the end of Boom Studios and their kids line pissing off Disney, and Disney taking the license away from them for good. Like I said, eventually Aaron and other people like me, we did get to work on the characters some more at other places, but that was it for Boom Studios. Now, after this, I was on an odyssey, reaching out to every publisher I could get my hands on. I mean, some publishers approached me as well, like Archie. Archie's a good story. Archie was my first me being stuck in a pissing contest between essentially one editor and a higher up editor. I was at, I think, the Chicago Comic-Con. I was signing copies of Toy Story, and I was approached by somebody from Archie who said that basically they were looking to modernize the characters, and this was before they successfully kind of modernized their brand, maybe a decade ago now. Specifically, Jughead. Jughead was always supposed to be this kind of cool punk character, somebody who went against the grain. He didn't care about women the way all the other guys did. He was more focused on food and the things that he liked. And I was somebody who was like that, and this editor saw that in me and said, you are like a living, breathing version of Jughead. You're somebody who likes what they like, and they don't care if the things that they like aren't considered cool by your average person. That's true. That's always who I've been. In fact, I really love to go against the grain. It's like, if this is very popular and cool from the mainstream people, I'm like, screw that. I don't like it. I find things that I love that aren't considered cool, and I try to bring more eyes to them. I try to bring more attention to them. I'm somebody who fights for the underdog. And that was very much what the Jughead character was kind of about. So I was asked to come in and bring a new gloss of paint to Jughead. And I spent a long time working on something awesome. I put together a ton of pitches, and I was hired, or at least I thought I was told I was hired to write an issue of Jughead. I wrote this book. It came out great. It's one of my favorite things I've ever written, like in terms of like from my pitch to the script. I was so satisfied with how the script came out. And the higher up editor that was in a pissing contest with this young buck editor who was trying to demonstrate how good he was and that he had good taste, he told me that I had written it on spec. I had been writing comics for about a decade professionally at this point. I didn't write anything on spec. I'd write a pitch. If the pitch was approved, I would write a script. I had a page rate. I knew how much I was getting paid for every page. I was not writing that on spec. I was told retroactively that I had written it on spec, and nothing was ever done with it. Nothing was ever developed. And it was very clear that this guy didn't want the other guy who had hired me in the first place to succeed. And basically, I did good work, and he wanted to make sure nobody ever saw it because he didn't want this other guy to succeed. And I was only able to ascertain this through emails back and forth between these guys, and I could tell basically this one dude was fucking up the plans of this young guy who was trying to make his way up the echelons of the company. And, I was a good choice. I really was a good guy to write Jughead. I brought something really cool to the page in how I wrote the character because he was a little bit like me in the right ways, in the ways in which that I guess I would honorably say I'm a cool, interesting cat that is unique in the world, and Jughead is unique in some similar ways to me. So I was a good person to sort of bring those aspects of the character out of him. But because this editor did not want to see this other editor look good, and I was the person he brought in, it didn't matter how good the work I did was. In fact, it actually did matter how good the work I did was. It was too good. It's never going to see the light of day because that guy didn't want the other guy to succeed. I tell you, there's just a million ways for this business to mess you up. Along the way, my buddy Aaron ended up working on a lot of other licensed comic books like Casper. He also worked on Puss in Boots. I think he was working like on DreamWorks, so it was like DreamWorks comic books. And I did this pitch for Casper's Scare School. I don't remember what that pitch was or even why that didn't work out. I remember with Puss in Boots, I did an amazing adaptation of the Magnificent Seven. I did Puss in Boots collecting these 6 other awesome fighters from the fairy tale world. They were all cats, so it was like the 3 kittens that lost their mittens, and the 3 kittens that lost their mittens actually was the ones that tanked the whole book for me, the whole pitch, because apparently the 3 kittens that lost their mittens were used in the movie, which I still haven't seen to this day. I've seen Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which I thought was awesome, actually. I really got to watch that other Puss in Boots movie. It had just come out. It was in the theaters at the time, or it was about to come out in the theaters. I don't remember, but I hadn't seen it. I couldn't see it to do any research, and I happened to pitch a story based on the Magnificent Seven with, the Cat and the Fiddle and all these other fairy tale cats that featured a few fairy tale cats that had already been used by them in the film. So instead of them asking me to adjust my pitch accordingly, they literally just said, okay, this pitch is null and void, and didn't accept my pitch. So that really pissed me off because I spent a long time on the pitch. I did a really great job. I planned to get that job. And the fact that they didn't give me a chance to adjust my pitch really upset me. Similarly, through Aaron, I found out that the Fraggles had been licensed by another company, and I started pitching for that directly to that editor. That editor asked me very specifically to write a pitch about Uncle Traveling Matt going to Comic-Con, which was a pitch that I had written, but he asked me to do a bigger version of it. I had also written a pitch that was just kind of more standard, sweet Fraggle kind of stories. And he asked me very specifically to focus on this Uncle Traveling Matt thing, which was rejected, and in favor of more sweet, traditional kind of Fraggle stories, which I had also pitched. But he had only pitched me for this Uncle Traveling Matt going to Comic-Con thing. So when that got rejected, I got rejected completely from the Fraggles, which was also very upsetting. I had spent a lot of time on the Fraggle pitches. I love Jim Henson. I really wanted to work on that material. I wanted to do a good job. I believe that Jim deserves people alive today to know the greatness that he achieved while he was here on Earth. I believe that Jim deserves, for the quality of the writing and the stories, especially thematically, to be similar to what he made while he was alive. Sorry if you're hearing any banging today while I record. I'm with my kids for the summer, and I keep asking them to cool it a little bit with the running around above me, but they're banging a little bit. Hopefully I'll be able to edit around some of the noise that's coming up on the show, like that bang that you probably just heard. So I'm just going to try not to worry about it to wrap up our show, but there's a few more that I do want to tell you about. Similarly, at this time, I found out that Sesame Street was coming to HBO, and I got an email for somebody who was working on Sesame Street, and I tried to get myself into that room. I love the Muppets more, but I grew up on Sesame Street too, and I have a lot of wonderful things to say with those characters. In particular, I've got 4 kids, and I loved the notion that I might be able to write the Sesame Street that those 4 kids would get to watch as little kids. That just appealed to me so much. I'm so sad that nobody ever read any of my pitches over there. I'm sure they were bombarded with pitches at the time. I didn't know this person who was working on the series personally. I had never written in television, so I didn't have the right credits on my resume to get this job in the first place, but I hope that if he had read the pitches, he would see the love that I had for the source material, the love that I had for Sesame Street, and the great ideas that I was bringing to the table. One of which is essentially the inspiration for the title of this show, and a tattoo that I have on my arm, my shoulder, that says Coolest Man Alive. I have a tattoo that says Coolest Man Alive. It's not because I think that I'm so cool and that I think I'm better than everybody else. It was a pledge to myself to be cool. And the way that I was raised to think of the word cool, that meant that you were somebody who was considerate and kind about other people. And I wrote this sketch that was going to be an ongoing thing where Ernie would show up wearing a leather jacket, doing good deeds. He'd hold open doors for people. He'd walk an old lady across the street. He'd pick up some garbage that wasn't his and throw it in the garbage can. And some kids who were looking across the street, seeing him in his leather jacket, seeing him doing all these good deeds, they'd say, "Hey, who's that guy?" "Oh, that's Ernie B. Good, the coolest Muppet on Sesame Street. He's so cool." I wanted to teach kids what it meant to be cool. What it means to be cool is to be kind. That's what it means. Cool people don't get upset. They don't get angry. They're always just right. They're cool. Yeah, I'm cool. You're cool. I'm comfortable enough with myself that I have the capacity to be good to you, to show you love. That's what it means to me to be the coolest geek alive, to be the coolest man alive, as my shoulder says. It means that every day I show up attempting to do right by the people around me. Because in the opposite of I think I'm better, I think we're all the same. I think we're all equal. I think it's my duty to do unto others as I hope that they would do unto me. And I hope you guys are all trying to go out into the world and be the coolest geeks alive yourself to all the people that you meet. That's the way. That's the way it is. Or at least, that's the way it should be. That's the world that I'd love to live in. There were a ton of other pitches, really well-intentioned pitches, like try new food with Cookie Monster, where Cookie Monster would be presented with some new food every week, and he'd be like, "Ooh, Brussels sprouts is good, but I like cookies better." Oh, man, I really want to write all those damn pitches. All these freaking Muppet pitches going to waste. Arrgh! We're getting towards the hour mark on another fabulous episode of the Coolest Geek Alive, and I think only appropriate to conclude this third part, and it's going to have to go into a fourth part if I'm going to talk about Evil Ernie and Image Comics and Heavy Metal Magazine and getting into doing independent stuff like what I did for Mythic Legions with the Four Horsemen Studios and the book that I'm doing right now, King of Kings #1, which is on Kickstarter. If you've gone and you've pledged to our campaign, oh my God, thank you from the bottom of my heart. There's so many people who have pledged to the campaign who I don't know, and I'm just imagining that a certain amount of them have to be our listenership, and I just thank you so much for listening to what I have to say, and I guess appreciating me enough to go and check out my book and pledge to our campaign. We have made our initial raise. The book is going to come out. It will be published. I'm so excited. It's been sitting in my hard drive for the past bunch of years, just collecting dust, and it's going to be published. And now we're raising more money still, though, so that we can finish the second issue, finish the third issue, and the fourth issue. It's a 4-issue miniseries of my blasphemous God-on-God battle of the bands to determine the reigning ideology of the day. There's 16 religions featured in our thing. They all get made fun of in equal measure. Well, Jesus gets a little bit more, but it's not really Jesus. It's just sort of a representation of Jesus based on some of the ways that fans of Jesus can make him look bad. And, we only really tend to know about other religions based on how they're portrayed to us by the people who follow those religions. And because of that, we end up with interesting and kind of funny stereotypes sometimes. And a lot of that is what the book's about, and a lot of that is what the book is playing off on. But we aren't just the stereotypes of the religion. We did a lot of research, and we know what we're talking about across the board, I would say, when it comes to how all these things are interacting with one another. So I really hope that you will give our book a chance. Go to Kickstarter, type in King of Kings #1 right now, and go pledge some money to the campaign. But to wrap up today's show specifically, because so much of this has revolved around the creations of Jim Henson, I want to talk about how I almost got to write for the Muppets. And I don't mean in comic books, I mean on TV. I was this close. I spent 5 years trying to get a hold of Bill Beretta. I'm a big fan of Bill's. I really just love his Pepe the King Prawn. I love his Earl Sinclair on Dinosaur. He is the greatest puppeteer to come along into I don't know how to say it, into the Muppet franchise, into the Muppet group, into the Muppet Puppet group. he's the best one. He's the one that I just, as soon as he showed up, you recognized his voice over and over again. Not that his impressions weren't good. You just recognized the energy and the comedy that he was bringing to every scene. He's so damn good at what he does. His comedic timing is amazing. He's just a brilliant performer. And I was trying to get his ear, because I believe that if I could tell him some of the things that I told you guys earlier in the show about the Muppets and why they work the way they work and why they aren't exactly working very well for Disney the way they keep playing them. And I got on his trail pretty quickly. I met some voiceover people at a party from my agency that my agency was throwing some Christmas many years ago, and the people had worked with Jim Henson Studios before, and they knew that Bill was the guy that I needed to talk to, and they said, you know what? You need to talk to Bill Beretta. I'm going to put you in touch with him. And it literally took me like 2.5 years of reaching out to that first person to get Bill Beretta's contact information. And then it took me another 2.5 years of reaching out to Bill Beretta before Bill finally agreed to go get some lunch with me. And I am not exaggerating here. 5 years of perpetually reminding myself, we're going to get to Bill. We're going to get to Bill. Just keep pushing. Just keep reaching out. I know he hasn't gotten back to you. Don't feel bad about it. Don't be insulted. Just keep on reaching out. Sometimes people ask me, what's your one piece of advice that you would give to fledgling writers, up-and-coming people? Follow up, follow up, follow up. Don't take it as an insult if they don't get back to you. These people are busy. Just keep politely following up. Even if you had a really bad introduction to the people, by the time you've been following up for a couple years, all they will remember is the polite emails that you have perpetually been sending them, and they will feel so guilty that they have been ignoring you for so long. So just hang tight and keep following up. Obviously, in this case, I took my own advice. And I sat down with Bill and I said all the things that I said today and more. And by the end of the meeting, Bill said, all right, man, I'm going to try to get you in to the writer's room for this new The Muppets TV show that they're doing. And he meant it. He definitely meant it. And when I reached out to him a few months later, as things had progressed, they had brought in the head writer for Modern Family, who was a big deal writer, and that guy had decreed that he wasn't going to be suffering any writers that he didn't know, and that nobody would be added to the writing staff that was not somebody that he had hand-chosen himself. So my hopes of writing the Muppets were dashed in an instant. And your hopes of somebody behind the scenes saying, hey guys, maybe it's a bad idea to make Miss Piggy a successful talk show host, that got dashed as well. Okay? That premise of that series was awful. It wasn't the right way for them to go with the Muppets. And I mean, they shot themselves in the foot right from the beginning there. I tried to get in there. I've been trying to get into the Muppets to help the Muppets for ages. I still desperately want to. I'm hoping that Disney might sell back the Muppets to Jim Henson Company, in which case I will drive down to Henson Studios and bang on the gate until they let me in, because somebody who loves these things and understands these characters needs to be at the helm, and that has not been the case for a long time. But it is what it is. Anyway, this has been part 3 of my personal journey as a writer, trying to bring you better versions of all the classic geek mythology that you love. It has been a long and hard road for me attempting to do it. Maybe this has helped to show you why sometimes we can't have nice things. So all these reasons. The way the frickin' shit is made is just backwards and stupid, and invariably things go wrong in the process of adaptation. Anyway, I'm your host, Jesse Blaze Snider. Join me this weekend for a special episode. It's about Secret Invasion and the other 10 examples of storylines that are adapted by Marvel Studios in name only, as Secret Invasion was adapted in name only by Marvel Studios. Join me this weekend for that short episode, and I will see you next Wednesday on another killer episode of the Coolest Geek Alive! You've been listening to Coolest Geek Alive with me, your host, Jesse Blaze Snider.
Isn't that heavy?
Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe for more excellent geek culture content. Thanks for listening.
Play that. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Coolest alive. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Stay with your tribe. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Revenge of the Geeks. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Week after weeks. It's gonna be freaking shit. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Living legit. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Food in our mouth. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Get in our mouth. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Tell all your friends. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Call right or text. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Raising the bar. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Straight to the stars. It's gonna be freaking awesome. It's starting soon. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Passing the moon. It's gonna be freaking awesome. On with the show. It's gonna be freaking awesome. Ready, set, go. It's going to be freaking awesome. Freaking awesome. It's going to be freaking awesome. Just wait. You'll see. You'll all see.